Hello to all my listeners, supporters, and aspiring writers, and welcome to the first episode of Creative Writing with Keziah Hyde. On today's show, we will be discussing the subject of story. What is a story? What plots are commonly associated? And the genres of different stories. Be sure to like my Facebook page, Keziah Hyde Media, and follow me on Twitter at Keziah Hyde Media to keep up to date with updates, projects, and extras. Now, on to the show. So what is a story? This is probably the easiest question to answer. A story can be anything fiction like Star Wars and Pirates of the Caribbean, or non-fiction like Chernobyl and Bronson. A story will always contain a person or people, place and event, which will be the main driving force of the story. An event could be the end of the world or alien invasion. It could be about love and hope or fear and despair. Stories are rooted in their genre and theme. There are examples of stories that have crossed genre and manipulated the theme, but that's a topic for another episode. Today, I want to focus on story and how we can tell the best stories. When it comes to focusing on your character, it's common practice to focus on the protagonist or hero. There have been many films like Maleficent and Megamind that have primarily focused on the antagonist, which is a kind of subversion of the narrative. Stanley Kubrick, director of such films as The Shining, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Full Metal Jacket, to name a few, once said the following: "Everything has already been done. Every story has been told. Every scene has been shot. It's our job to do one better." Of course, he was meaning directors and their ability to retell stories in an interesting and impactful way. I feel that even if every story has been told, there is still room to write more. That's why when I write, I go with the mindset of reinvention and inclusion of story elements that, when put together, will give a new, fresh, and exciting story to tell. If you're writing a film or novel, you have to think, is this just a standalone or is it part of a series? In that case, you want to focus on structuring your story to fit the narrative of the series format, which we will explore in a future episode. As I said in episode 0, writing a story is like a jigsaw puzzle. You have to create all the pieces and put together. It can be stressful, but rewarding. So when it comes to creating story, you have many different avenues you can go down. But it's important to acknowledge that whatever story you do tell, you have to make sure you know its genre and theme. So our first segment that we will be looking at is story themes and plots. Here, I will explain the purpose of theme so you can start to think of what your story fits into. It's important to note that some stories have the ability to be placed in almost any genre, unless their themes are specific to one genre. Lord of the Rings, for example, couldn't really be set in outer space, because its theme of dragons and elves and the One Ring and Gandalf roots it in fantasy. Now, with that being said, I will start off with 7 basic plots. Christopher Booker wrote an interesting book on this subject and theorised that in all of fiction there are 7 basic plots. These are: overcoming the monster. This plot is considered an underdog story. This is where our protagonist has to overcome some sort of threat, i.e. the monster. This doesn't have to be an actual monster. It could be a metaphorical monster, like an evil corporation or dictator. But by overcoming the monster archetype, they bring peace to themselves and the people they have protected. Rags to riches. In classic literature and film, this plot is defined by a protagonist having to overcome poverty and their lower class to rise up to upper class, sometimes aristocracy, achieving fame, fortune, and status. This plot device can be great when used like the well-known character Cinderella. The quest. Used in most fiction and films such as Avengers Endgame, Jason and the Argonauts, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, although that's more of a comic parody of the Arthurian legend, and Raiders of the Lost Ark, to name a few. The point of the quest is for a character or group of characters to go on a quest and seek a MacGuffin, whether it be Infinity Stones or the Holy Grail. Once the heroes have found the MacGuffin, they come face to face with the villains and an epic battle ensues, where the heroes must use the MacGuffin to defeat the villains. If you want to know more about MacGuffins in a future episode, be sure to comment on any post from Keziah Hyde Media, and hopefully I will explore in future episodes what a MacGuffin is. Voyage and return. This plot type possibly one of the best ones to use, as it lies predominantly on the character changing from either good to bad or vice versa. The voyage is the journey your character goes on. The way of transport can be anything from trains, planes, or boats. It doesn't have to be vehicles either. Like, for example, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is about our main protagonist going down a rabbit hole into this fantastical world and returning a changed individual. The whole purpose of Voyage and Return is to give our characters a chance to prove who they really are subconsciously. Tragedy. Hamlet, Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet. This is Shakespeare's take on tragedy. He's written countless others, but those are among his most well known. If I know one thing about writing, it's always put your characters in difficult or heartbreaking situations. The more tragic their situation, the deeper the impact is for the audience. Tragedy, along with comedy, which we'll get onto in a minute, is a plot type as old as civilization. We have written and performed tragedies for thousands of years, and no matter how many variations have been written, there are still new elements that can be injected into your story. One of my favourites and most controversial modern tragedies is Star Wars: Revenge of the Sith. This film explores the main protagonist, Anakin Skywalker's inevitable descent into evil, leaving the Jedi and ultimately becoming the notorious Darth Vader. This film is controversial for the fact it's a prequel, and they aren't highly regarded as the originals are, but this one is incredible for the fact we know our hero will fall, but it's how he falls that's important. Comedy. Now, this plot type is widely known and loved by millions, if not billions of people. From such films as Blazing Saddles to Doctor Strangelove, comedies are the best format for making people laugh and forget about the real world for an hour or two, and indulge into silliness. Blazing Saddles is by far my favourite comedy film, as it makes racism look like what it is, stupid and ridiculous. The idea of the comedy is obstacles, and how throughout the film, novel or TV series, either one or several characters overcome these obstacles and usually end up having a happily ever after. Romance usually falls in a subgenre of comedy, but there are also examples of characters not living a happily ever after, and that is a subversion of the genre. Take, for example, the show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. The format is a group of people who own and work in a bar, but have increasingly terrible ideas for schemes that in the real world would see them all locked up for a very long time. But in this show, they end up back where they started, having not progressed and learnt anything from their experience. Although the show can be extremely risky at times with its subject matter, the idea of characters in a sitcom never changing is original in a landscape of sitcoms that sees the opposite. Comedies can be increasingly hard to write, especially if you aren't familiar with the comedic format. I have found at times it is difficult to write comedies, and so instead of giving up, I have written sketches to help me flesh out my strengths and weaknesses as a comedy writer, and I recommend doing the same. I recently uploaded a sketch to my YouTube channel, Keziah Hyde, which I made a few years ago called I Spy, which is to date one of my best sketches. I will be supplying a link to the episode and access to the script so you can see for yourself how I wrote it after the show. Now on to our final plot type, rebirth. This doesn't mean a literal rebirth, but a metaphorical one. The idea is that your main character starts off bitter, horrible and cruel, but when presented with consequences of their actions, they are given a chance to change. This is a truly powerful plot type, as you are showing that no matter how bad a person is, they can change. Take Ebenezer Scrooge from Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol. He is a harsh and horrible person, but when presented with the consequences of his actions, he is given a chance to change and be reborn into a kind and generous man. If you choose this option, your character must go through this change and come out a better individual than before. So there are your plot types. If you want to know more about plot types, I will be giving an in-depth analysis of each plot type to a film, book or TV series which expresses the core concept on my Patreon, along with additional extras like early access, not just to podcast episodes, but sketches and analysis of videos and more. So if you're interested in knowing more about this, head over to my Patreon and consider donating for more exclusive content. The link will be provided on my Facebook page, Keziah Hyde Media. Now, on to our second and last topic of the episode, story genres. When it comes to your story, you'll find that a specific genre will start to appear. If you are writing with the intention of a certain genre, it will make it much easier to plot your story around the genre. Nowadays, it's common to mix genres to create an original piece of work. For example, the film Knives Out, which takes the classic whodunit murder mystery with crime. Although they seem on the surface like they take place in the same genre, the structure of each defines the format. Murder mystery is all about us, the audience, figuring out the killer, and crime is us knowing who the killer is and finding out if they escape the charges. A great video to watch on this is How Knives Out Switches Genres Twice by Just Right. Genre switching and blending is something we will talk about in a future episode. In terms of literary and film genres, there are so many to name and explain, so I'll only say the most popular and a brief description of each. Comedy. This one is most popular in both formats and have millions of original and imaginative examples, such as Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, Bridget Jones's Diary, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and my personal favourite, Red Dwarf, the novel. As you can tell, these books have also been made into films and TV shows. In Red Dwarf's case, it began as a TV series and was expanded in the books. Comedy's main goal is to make you laugh. It is also there to subvert expectations and tropes. Drama. The most common literary and film genre. Drama is anything from a courtroom drama like 12 Angry Men, or To Kill a Mockingbird, Emma, and The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. This genre is all about real-world problems and issues, and highlight them in a novel or film format. Horror. The macabre and sometimes disturbing genre of horror is populated by the fear of the unknown, creatures and demons of immense power, and other fearful elements. This genre's aim is to scare and disturb. Fantasy. Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Harry Potter. These are all titles that are part of a magical and fantastical world in which dragons, goblins, orcs and more exist. This genre's aim is to primarily transport the reader into a world far different from their own. Romance. Romance. A tale as old as time. Love is a many splendid thing, of which is popular in this genre. The themes usually have a sort of boy meets girl or vice versa. They fall in love. Something happens to split them apart. They overcome that obstacle and come back together to get married and live happily ever after. And lastly, we have crime and suspense. This genre is all about the detective sleuth, like Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot, Ms. Marple, and many others to name. It focuses on a murder. The whodunit genre is all about guessing, as you can tell by the title, who did it. But it can also focus on the viewpoint of the killer or the victim. This genre is amazing in how recreative and adaptable it can be for both television and film. So there you are. A brief view of stories, plots, themes and genres. If you'd like to hear more about subgenres, or for me to pick apart a story from a certain genre, leave a comment on my Facebook page, Keziah Hyde Media, and in a future episode, you may get your wish. But as they always say, be careful what you wish for. My next episode, Story Structure, will be out next Friday at 8 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time, or GMT, or British Time, and you can listen to these episodes on both Spotify and by looking up Creative Writing with Keziah Hyde on Anchor. Be sure to follow me on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Keziah Hyde Media for more updates, and there will be links to my personal work provided so you can see examples of stories, scripts, treatments and more. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you next week.